This is just a Westminster talking shop load of nonsense, frankly. It makes no difference to British policy, as Sunak has made clear, and it makes absolutely no difference to either the people of Gaza or the people of Israel what the House of Commons has to say about this matter. And yet the heat and bad feeling that is generated can have quite the knock-on effect in terms of internal party dynamics and the rest of it.
Stephen Flynn, SNP leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by echoing the sentiments of the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition in relation to the heroic bravery of Alexei Navalny. We all must continue to be united in our opposition to Vladimir Putin. Mr. Speaker, as it stands, some 60% of the buildings in Gaza are either damaged or destroyed. Much of the farmland is in ruin. Some 30,000 people are dead, 70,000 injured, and 1.4 million people are currently sheltering in Rafah, awaiting an imminent Israeli onslaught. Surely the Prime Minister must accept that that does not amount to self-defence.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I share the concern of many members about the high rate of civilian casualties and indeed the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza, and that is why we have called consistently for an immediate humanitarian pause, which would allow for the safe release of hostages and more aid going into Gaza so that we create the sustainable conditions for a long-term and enduring ceasefire. That is what our diplomatic efforts are focused on, and that is what I impressed upon the Israeli Prime Minister last week when I spoke to him.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, tonight this House will have the opportunity to join with the majority of the international community and say that enough is enough, that the killing in Gaza must stop and that the hostages must be released. And the best way to do that is to send a clear and united message that we back an immediate ceasefire. Surely all of us, irrespective of our political allegiance, can agree on that very issue.
Mr. Speaker, of course we want to see the fighting in Gaza end as soon as possible and never again allow Hamas to carry out the appalling terrorist attacks that Israel was subject to. But he talks about the UN resolution, but just calling for an immediate full ceasefire now, which collapses back into fighting within days or weeks, is not in anyone's interest, Mr. Speaker. We must work towards a permanent ceasefire, and that's why the right approach is the approach that we've set out and the United States have set out in their resolution, which is for an immediate humanitarian pause to get hostages out and aid in so that we then can create the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire. And in the meantime, we're doing everything we can to increase the amount of humanitarian aid that we bring into Gaza, something I discussed with the King of Jordan last week, and we will have more updates in the coming days of more airdrops into Gaza, but also just in the last couple of days have managed to deliver family tents into Gaza, which are providing much-needed shelter for very vulnerable people.
So, quite a lot of words there from Rishi Sunak, but actually making the more substantive point that whatever happens in the House of Commons tonight is not going to change the situation on the ground, where things are terrible for both the Israeli hostages and millions of people who live in Gaza.
And I think setting out the government position in a bit more detail, that defence against calling for an immediate ceasefire on the grounds that anything that collapses back into infighting, in his words, within days or weeks is not in anyone's interest. I think listening to that will have been, of course, Keir Starmer, who is known to have been resistant to changing Labour's position, to diverging from the government's position and now presenting a divided front to Western allies. So I think having Rishi Sunak state it in the House there, I think, will focus some minds.
Tim, how big a political story is this? I mean, clearly it was notable the other day, last time that this motion came forward, and dozens of Labour MPs defied the whip, and Keir Starmer lost 10 front benches. I mean, ultimately, is it going to make any difference to Keir Starmer's chance of becoming Prime Minister?
I think probably no is the answer to that question, but at the same time, it has an impact in two ways. I think this is an emblematic issue now for so many people, particularly as we're seeing with some of these by-elections with the Muslim vote in some of these towns. That's a big deal. I mean, I guess it's possible it could affect the outcome of a few seats. Labour's support amongst that community is obviously dropping over the last few weeks. But it's also become a classic sort of Westminster argument that has literally zero bearing on the events concerned and the.
It's just a rerun of sort of Rwanda amendments. You just change the word, Rwanda to Gaza, and it's just the same.
I don't want to, belittle the effect on either side of this, and there are obviously points on both sides, as there always are in the Middle East. But this is just a Westminster talking shop load of nonsense, frankly. It makes no difference to British policy, as Sunak has made clear, and it makes absolutely no difference to either the people of Gaza or the people of Israel what the House of Commons has to say about this matter. And yet the heat and bad feeling that is generated can have quite the knock-on effect in terms of internal party dynamics and the rest of it. And I think has much more impact internally than it probably does with the public at large, who have a pretty pragmatic view of all this, which is that terrorists shouldn't go around slaughtering innocent people, and people shouldn't then, in response, go and kill a lot of innocent children. It's not a difficult position to share both of those things, but in Westminster, you appear to have to take one side or the other.
Yeah, I was speaking to a shadow minister yesterday who said it felt heat-wise within the Labour Party similar to in 2016, and that the fear among some of their colleagues was that the heat would just rise so much that there'd be just so much pressure on them and people wouldn't be feeling hugely safe, and it wouldn't be the best place to be having a debate like this. I think you heard just then as well, did you hear over Flynn someone shouting, "You're dividing us, you're dividing us," the SNP coming under some pressure now for why, when the Labour amendment bears such close resemblance to the SNP one, they want to push forward with this vote anyway.